Well, it's 1 in the morning. I guess that's the perfect time to record a long ass video about riffs. Over the years, I've noticed, and I can hardly be the only one, that Palladium books is a little controversial. At least their games are. I think in large part this is probably because of their rule system. It's clunky, but I think that's also part of its charm because it's a very old school gaming experience, the likes of which you kind of have to like go to like the basic fantasy game to otherwise find, or go to drive through RPG and get a printed copy of the old D&D rule cyclopedia or something if you really want to have that real old school type feeling. I mean, yeah, Savage Worlds has a new version of Rifts. I haven't myself looked at it, but I'm like, whatever. If you want to use a setting and use a different rule system, that's fine. More power to you. I'm not arguing necessarily for that, although I do like the fact that Palladium Books is still around. I personally like their service overall, even though they don't go through Amazon Prime or anything like that. You still have to pay them for UPS shipping and stuff like that, but whatever. There's worse things in the world. They're not as easy to find in game stores, but hell, game stores are not exactly easy to find anymore anyway, so eh. But the setting itself is fantastic. It's a great giant toolbox of damn near everything you could possibly want to throw into adventure. But that's, I think, maybe a little bit part of the problem. I'll get a little bit into that later. Why the Minion War is great, though, I've expanded upon in a couple videos. But in brief, I feel that it really unlocks Rift's full potential, and that by giving a universal opponent all these factions that provide all these wonderful character options that wouldn't necessarily have any reason to work together, now suddenly have a reason to work together. You can have a fully integrated Rifts team. It's also a huge opponent that'll give some of the more overpowered characters that people over the years have considered to be problematic. Well, it gives them something to do, something to throw themselves at, and be all that they can be, and not feel like they have to hold back or anything, fighting this giant demonic menace. I also kind of feel that the common enemy thing, it turns a lot of the background conflict that's been going on in the game, it puts it into the background and turns it into intrigue instead of open warfare, because a lot of the countries and nations and kingdoms directly involved in the Minion War, either as defenders or as forces within the war, uh, their old beefs don't matter as much right now, but they're still going to be ongoing. It's not like they're going to cozy up and all become buddies, but they're just not going to like openly shoot at each other as much, kind of a thing. But there's still like lots of room for intrigue, and for reasons I'll get into here in a moment. That's actually very good for adventuring using the original Rifts game system, because I think a lot of the problem that Rifts has and why it has the reputation it has that I don't think is undeserved is that its rule system is misunderstood. Like I said, yes, it's clunky. The attribute system is almost useless because the attributes don't really do anything until you get the high end level or you get the bottom end level. And the combat rules, yes, they're complicated. There's a lot of them. A lot of time is spent on them. Creature design is focused around how deadly they are and stuff like that. But they're kind of a trap because the experience system doesn't really rely on combat at all, and the experience you earn for fighting enemies is fairly minimal on the scale of awards for what they have, and it doesn't scale up as you go on level. There's no at your 5th level, and now you're fighting 5th level villains that give you so much experience that you're still leveling up at the same pace. Palladium is that old school slow grind kind of experience system. That's why it's only got 15 levels. You're lucky to even get past 5th level, really, and that's still with like a year or two of gaming. So, and with the same character. Um, like even the most top tier foes is like a 400 experience point award, and that's for top tier stuff. On average, you're gonna like maybe get anywhere from like 25 to 100 experience points for defeating something in combat. So yes, there's a lot of combat rules there for when you need them or if you want to use them, but you don't actually need to hang on them so much. D&D you do. Like the experience system for that is entirely combat generated. It gives you some like vague suggestions on awarding experience points for achieving like some sort of mission goal or for solving like a particularly hard puzzle and little things like that. But there's really like no hard out guideline for it. Whereas the bulk of the experience points uh, awards for pretty much all Palladium games are the same, and including in Rifts. And its focus is very heavy on skills, use of clever ideas, good judgment. It mentions clever multiple times, uh, reasoning, quick thinking, heavy emphasis on good role playing, especially in the face of temptation to not play in character. Uh, it straight out gives you experience for avoiding violence unnecessarily. It rewards self sacrifice, acts of compassion, heroic actions, and critical planning. Really, Rifts is actually pretty ideal for heist scenarios in many ways because of that kind of stuff. Because heist scenarios are going to involve a lot of skills and a lot of planning and a lot of quick thinking as the heist itself goes down, and potentially some moral quandaries built into it. Over because if you're performing a heist, you're screwing over someone, and is that really right? All that kind of stuff. So, and I think if people, especially game masters, approach writing their adventures specifically with what the experience award system is in mind, you might find you might have adventures that click along a little faster because people are actually getting experience awards that'll get them up to a level instead of 25 points at a time because they're just shooting little random bad guys and stuff. And yeah. So what you want to do is you want to design adventures for Rifts that have skill use, moral dilemmas, and any situation that requires players to have to come up with a plan. Those three things should kind of always be kind of core. Good role playing is just something you should expect and encourage anyway. And just try to generally use combat sparingly. I mean, it's good to have action and excitement in your game, but with Rifts, it is real easy for combat to bog down your entire gameplay experience, and you want to avoid that. The thing about Rifts, and especially with the mega damage system, is you got to think about how you want to manipulate the economy of the game. I know it's a weird connection to start off with, but play out with me here. A lot of the mega damage technology and the cost of its upkeep is really expensive. Millions of credits for like laser pistols and basic armor, and tens of millions to hundreds of millions of credits if you want like big giant robots and all that kind of shit. So that either means in order to achieve that, you have to have an economy where players are doing missions and getting paid huge millions of dollars of credits at a time to go do their little stupid mission for first level characters. Or the idea of them buying any of this stuff outright is next to impossible. You have a more truncated economy, which is kind of much more what I recommend. And in order to be able to gain new equipment or fix their equipment, they're probably going to have to do something for it. Another thing about Rifts Adventures is I do find that it's a very mission friendly kind of setting. A lot of go do this for us kind of stuff, and we'll give you as reward kind of thing. And that's fine. I mean, that's the basis for many of a D&D adventure game too, except D&D is also very treasure huntery, and it's hard to hunt for credits as treasure as much unless you want to play a real cyberpunky crime type risk game, which is possible. You can do almost anything in the setting. Um, I think that's also part of the problem is that you can overload by allowing too much. It's up to the game master to, when you're designing your adventures and what the setting you want to have your corner of rifts be taking part in, you got to limit what the player options are to stuff that's appropriate to that land and also appropriate to the overall tone and feel of the universe. I myself very much dial down the zany elements. The four things I tend to lean on for how I like to run riffs are I wanted to have overtones of Mad Max, cyberpunk, Star Trek, and Lovecraftian Robert E. Howard type Cthulhian way of looking at magic. But you can make it a real D&D-ish, very Lord of the Rings-ish. There's a whole lot of ways to play with riffs, and like I said, even using those four templates mixed together is just kind of a rough guideline. But you can very much dial things up and down just by your own choices and how you want to present them. The species characters encounter are entirely up to you, and the species your players play is entirely up to you to dole out the information. There's no player handbooks for riffs. Player knowledge can be a bit of an issue, and I think also though the Minion War kind of helps a bit with that because it nullifies the importance of some of that inside lore, and actually can be helpful because it allows players to use that lore to come up with plans to fight the armies of Hades and Divil. So, I mean, it said, like I said, it unlocks the full potential of rifts and takes a lot of things that used to be negative and turns them into positives. Now, however, that all being said, rifts is still a clunky game, and Megaverse in Flames has a few little issues, I would say, in how it's put together and how it's focused. It's very much split into half. This is the demon section, and this is the devil section. And I don't know if that's really the right way to have gone about it. And so that's part of why I want to make this video, is to kind of help potential game masters or people running the game right now kind of have a better way of reframing how to look at the overall conflict so they can get their head around it. Right off the bat, the Minion War on Rift's Earths is probably too large for any one campaign to tackle, unless you do a real specific thing, and that's going to have to be a subject for a later video. It's going to be a background thing, and some of what's happening with the other hell pits in the setting, that's not the direct focus of what your own group of player characters is working on. You need to develop a timeline so you know in your own head how these things are being resolved by other forces out there. And so what I'm largely doing is looking at the major hell pits, devil and demon armies, and narrowing down exactly where they are and who surrounds them, who are the most logical foes that they will face without player character influence, and so to see which ones are likely to be contained or destroyed. Because the thing is the Megaverse in Flames and the Minion War presents itself as being like this terrible apocalyptic thing, and it can be. And I guess, I mean, it is an invasion of demons and devils, so having an apocalyptic flavor goes with it. But it's really easy to overhype this. This is a setting that has a bunch of super powerful, high-tech civilizations and alien races and super magical beings that is used to this. This isn't their first rodeo, so it's easy to think this is just going to destroy everything. It's not. Overall, the end game that like either side has to gain 50% of the planet's ley line nexuses, and there's a shit ton of ley line nexuses all over the planet. And the idea that either one's ever going to get to that point is really hard to work out mathematically. They might not ever be entirely knocked out of the game, not for a long time, but they can be contained. But there's still getting to that point and establishing that. There's still a lot of adventuring to go on, and the way this permutes the setting gives a lot of options and stuff. In the short term, I will say that the demons are the greater threat in the immediate now. They have the most hell pits in North America, and their troop disposition is much more geared towards combat roles. The devils. The devils are obviously more infiltrators and manipulator types. And the demons are more made to go around ripping things to pieces. It's not that those things don't exist on the devil side, but they have much more of a Loki-ish kind of flavor. They're devils after all. Their combat's not going to be their first choice, and so them being formed into armies is a little bit more unnatural for them than the demons. And so early on, it'll seem like the demons are ripped and ready to win this shit, but they've also bitten off more they can chew. They've way underestimated what North America can throw back at them, and they've ignored a couple of what could have been potentially softer targets they could have started with on other parts of the planet that they'll have a harder time getting to, or are actually more open to the devils getting to. But the conflict zones, which are the campaign adventure hotspots we want to focus on, that come from the stuff in the book, break down into like what I would say are 4 categories. You have some red herrings, which are battle fronts that'll probably get a lot of attention from the standing forces of the good guys, but aren't necessarily the places they need to be focusing their attention on. Then you have the quote-unquote lesser hell pits. These are a couple of locations that aren't in and of themselves dangerous, but for a couple of factors are probably not long for this world. Then there's a group of major conflict areas. These are things that are going to be harder to resolve, much harder to resolve in the short term. They might be able to be kept from becoming full-on active operational hell pits, though. So these are some of the things that I mean by like zones that are contained. There'll be ongoing conflicts in them and erupting and spilling out of them and drawn into them. But it is neither the devils nor the demons are going to get like the full upper hand out of these. Then there are a couple of endgame hell pits, who either through their extreme isolation or choice of location are going to be next to impossible to get off the map. And so these are most likely to become active and be able to bring in just a continuous flow of reinforcements. And so, but also though their locations also kind of limit their usefulness a little bit, though. It's a two-edged sword. And there's also a couple of wild cards. So the red herrings are the ruins of the kingdom of Tolkien. Tolkien was a magic kingdom in Minnesota that the coalition states had an extended war with up until recently within the timeline of the setting. The coalition won. Tolkien is left in ruins. And Tolkien is the origin spot for where the Minion War erupts on Earth. When a bunch of demons arrive out of some of the rifts there. Thankfully, there is a bunch of coalition forces already staged there because they've been already trying to contain whatever remnants of dark magic are to be found in the area. But they were overwhelmed with the demons' armies spread out across North America out of there. The coalition is likely to very much intensify its efforts to keep the area contained, but there will be ongoing fighting because those rifts are likely to stay active and still be used to send out new random forces. There's also what I personally call the Great Lakes Front, which is largely takes place around the lower peninsula of Michigan, and mainly is because there's active rifts in Detroit, Windsor, and also down in Chicago. And in between them is the city of New Laszlo, which it's important. Like I said, the demons are likely to be very easily contained, but it's very important for the setting, and so as game masters who are designing your campaigns, to try to give the good guys a bloody nose. New Laszlo, as it's right smack dab in the middle of Lower Michigan, it's going to be cut off from its parent city in Ontario, and it's going to be surrounded by 2 devil hotspots. Plus, the coalition doesn't really care for them anyway and is distrustful of magic users because of potential demonic associations, so they're not going to necessarily just automatically buy that they're on the same side. So New Laszlo is a prime target to get wiped off the map by the bad guys. There is also what I call the Zytikics Wall. The Zytikics are one of the iconic races that go way back to the very beginning of Rifts. They're this mega damage bugs species kind of a thing with some overtones, maybe you could say, of Aliens, the Aliens movies, a little bit, just a little bit. They're actually a really huge threat to the setting. And one of the demonic overlords, there's a high chance, it says, of 65% chance that he's going to make the mistake of trying to tackle the Zytikics, thinking they're going to be an easy target, and that might end up both wiping out his army and also putting a big dent in the Zytikics, and also stirring them up and making them attack anything vaguely devil looking that comes into their areas and whatnot. I would personally just call that Sindos Folly, because that's the name of the overlord, is Sindel. So anyway, the two lesser hell pits are the Dinosaur Swamp. It would seem that one would be an easy one for the demons to establish, because the native population are a bunch of primitive barbarian mutants who don't have much in the way of technology or even magical knowledge and stuff. But the land is filled with mega damaged dinosaurs, and you have forces like the Haroon pirates and the Splugorth, who are highly technological and are not going to want demons taking over something they consider to be one of their hunting grounds. The dinosaur swamps of the southeastern seaboard are a very likely landing place for the anti-monsters that have come up from Colombia. There's two spots there I think that they're likely to land. It's either that or Texas, maybe both. But so having a bunch of anti-monsters show up, you have the Cherokee, one of the Native American tribes, and the Native Americans are actually one of the, next to the coalition, are also one of the groups that end up being like kind of central heroes to how the Minion War unfolds in terms of who the good guys are, because on many different fronts, Native Americans end up being involved in one way or another. And whereas there's people who think having all the role playing game ish fantasy, Native American magic, and all that kind of stuff is racist. I can't see that in the same way that I guess J.R.R. Tolkien is racist against white people for portraying European magic that way. But I don't know. I think it's kind of cool in the setting that, in many ways, Native Americans have been able to return to North America and return to their lifestyle and have as much of their land back as they're able to get. And that they're in the Minion War, they're actually poised to be, like I said, one of the major heroic groups. And I don't think that got covered quite enough in the books as written. Let's see. So where am I? The Dinosaur Swamp Hell Pits likely end up being kind of overwhelmed by all these various forces. That they're not likely to form an alliance against the Hell Pit directly, but informally they'll end up being destroyed. It's also a likely target for the Coalition Navy, since it's right there along the seaboard. And then also the thing that I think also has a lot of story potential for developing the setting there is the Sumerian Nation. The Sumerians are these robot creations of Archie that are designed to mimic a race of alien warrior women, and they're all mysterious. And even though Archie 3 is very frozen up on what to do about the Minion War, I would say leave him that way. But the Sumerians still have their innate programming to roam around hunting monsters, so they're not going to sit idly by while there's a hell pit right on the edge of their territory. And so the Sumerians are also going to likely be a very major force in blowing the Dinosaur Swamp Hell Pit off the face of the map. And in doing so, could potentially also, you could have things like where the barbarian tribes of humans start to follow the Sumerians around like camp followers and taking the same tribal names that the Sumerians give themselves. And so after the conflict ends and the Hell Pit's destroyed, the Sumerians might actually find themselves in charge of an actual Sumerian nation. Also, the next lesser Hell Pit is the Old Southwest. There's a Hell Pit in New Mexico, and it's surrounded on one side by the coalition state of Lone Star and northern Texas. And it's got the Colorado Baronies to the north, which are probably its most likely targets for easy victims, and is something that also might be one of those things that gets destroyed. That's on the good guy side. To its west, it's got Arsno. To its south, it's got the Vampire Kingdoms, and so it doesn't have any way south. And to the east, it's likely to end up getting destroyed. Also, Arsno, its mercenary corps is controlled by a true Atlantean. True Atlanteans have a lot of classic beef with demons, and so it's very natural for them to throw themselves into trying to destroy this hell pit alongside the coalition. The coalition's going to end up wanting to pour a lot of firepower on this because Lone Star, as of now, is their dominant manufacturing center. Also, because of this, the next video I'm going to do is going to be about something I'm working on. Basically, I'm adapting the older information from Lone Star, which is set like 6 years before the events in Megaverse in Flames, to reflect what's going on in Megaverse in Flames. But suffice to say, yeah, the coalition's not going to stand for having a hell pit that close tactically to their main source of manufacturing. And also being the place where you have a lot of dog boys helps a lot. And the fact that so many people along the Mexican border are already used to fighting vampires and the supernatural actually lends them to being able to defend themselves somewhat against the demonic invaders, especially since the Hell Lord there is an avatar of the apocalypse demon Death, and his whole hell army is kind of has this vague undead vibe. There's also potential there in this setting to have good guy vampires, depending on how you want to resolve what happened with Xavier's vampire army's conflict with Arsno. If Xavier wasn't destroyed, and it's some sort of like it was an ongoing conflict, but neither side wins kind of thing, Xavier might be a good representative to have some actual vampires be fighting against the demons, because most of the ones in the vampire kingdoms are far enough south that they're not likely to want to become directly involved anytime soon. Just as a side note, the stuff that is described in the book is not the be-all, end-all of what's there in terms of demonic forces. There's always going to be random rifts opening up from the dimensions of from the dimensions of Hades and Divul, and pouring out groups that are, in all likelihood, directly loyal to the lords and ladies of these dimensions, not necessarily to the general overlords and hell lords that are already on Rift's Earth. So there's lots of room for game masters to mix things up, throw things that players aren't expecting if they're familiar with the materials in the book already. And also for them to come up with new potential fronts for the war. So by adding in new generals, especially as existing hell pits get destroyed, and as campaigns progress, you might want to bring in new things that aren't written about. The major conflict zones, the big ones, the ones that are going to be hard to get rid of, right off the bat, it's the magic zone. That's what covers Ohio and kind of borders parts of Kentucky and Indiana and Tennessee and stuff like that. There's a Devil army that emerged there. It's Overlord. He wants to get to Tolkien, but in all realisticness, I don't really see how he's ever going to get out of the magic zone, because the amount of coalition attention that area is going to get, it's going to be another major front for the coalition. The Demon Lord Rune, her whole shtick is that she's got her army disguised as mercenaries. And it says in the books that she's likely to try to corrupt one of the cities of the area. And I think actually really her most likely target should be Merktown, because it's the perfect place for her to be able to operate right out in the open. She won't build her hell pit there and will not disclose the true demonic nature of her forces to anyone there, to do her best to maintain the cover that they're just another mercenary army fighting and all this. And the hell pits will probably still be built in secret, and because of the various forces in the magic zone, those hell pits will probably get ferreted out and destroyed on the regular, and she'll constantly have to be remaking them. But exposing Rune herself, that could end up getting Merktown destroyed if she's ever discovered, because the coalition might not be willing to take the time to ferret out how vast her infiltration of the city is, and they might just decide to bomb it off the map before warning anybody so that they can't allow anyone to escape. It's also very likely that Dunscan gets destroyed, or at least the surface level of the kingdom, since they have the underground city. But playing a dangerous middle game between both demons and devils, because Dunscan has had connections with both. And also the existing issues they already have with the coalition that goes back practically at the coalition's inception. Yeah, it's very likely that they're going to become targeted one way or the other, especially if they do end up being forced to take sides. Like, say, if Overlord Shade ends up like forcing Dunscan to take him in or something because too much of his army has been lost or scattered. So anyway, after the Magic Zone, there's what I call the Eurozone, which does not get nearly enough attention in the book. And it's so big that I kind of want to do another video about it. So I'm just going to say that that's an area that needs major attention. That's going to be ongoing stuff that's not going to be resolved quickly, like the lesser hell pits. And then there's finally the Calgary siege. The Calgary is the heart of the city of monsters and seems ripe and ready to become a stronghold for Hell-Lord Doom at first. If it weren't for the fact that the Coalition already knows about it, the Cyber Knights already know about it, and a Devil Lord named Necroskull has an army going there, I would say as Game Masters, allow Necroskull's army to get into Calgary, let the two armies fight it out, kind of keep both off balance so neither are able to establish their own hell pit, especially as their slave populations are going to be heavily affected by attrition. And groups like the Coalition and local tribes of Native Americans and maybe wild side stalkers basically have the whole city cordoned off from outside, and as things escape, they'll just eventually get hunted down and destroyed by one group or another. And in the meantime, also the Cyber Knights can continue to do their thing of doing like hit and run type strikes into the city itself, trying to take out major targets and keep the hell pits off balance as well. And then there's the two Endgame Hell pits, the ones that are going to be the hardest to get rid of. On the demon side, you have Hell-Lord Fury and his hell pit in the Canadian tundra. It's purely because it is so isolated. Fury tends to jump his forces out, and like a lot of them apparently are involved in the false front in the Great Lakes and Michigan. But his hell pit is being built way up north, way far from anyone, and I don't really see any reason why it's not going to get able to be activated. And so he's going to have a steady stream of demons coming in underneath him, and it'll end up turning him into one of the more prominent demon lords on Earth. But really, his only real threats are the Tundra Rangers, and the Coalition is going to be a little too busy. Maybe if the Tundra Rangers can convince Free Quebec to get in on things, but for my own opinion, I actually think Free Quebec should be more involved with the Eurozone, and I guess I'm going to talk about that in my sequel video to this. The other in-game hell pit is Cuba. Cuba was broken up into 4 chunks by the Cataclysm, and one of these chunks is a host to a devil city called Ciudad del Diablo. And because of its positioning, it's going to be next to impossible to dig out and stop from being able to activate its hell pits. And it can be blockaded, and I think actually the Caribbean Sea in and of itself should be kind of its own kind of minor conflict zone, because there's a lot of potential there for sea battles. The Coalition Navy, Splugorth, Gatani, Lemurians, the Colombian Navy with the Anti-Monsters, all versus the devil ships and stuff. But short of obliterating the entire island, I don't really see a lot of ways to dig them out. So that's part of why, while in the short term, the demons are the greater threat, in the long term, the devils are better positioned to last it out. Also because of the fact that they play politics and insinuation, they could find backdoor ways to gain control of a lot more ley line nexuses around the planet. Also because they're positioned from Cuba, if they can get around the blockade situation somehow, they can gain access to other parts of the planet that are open and ripe for invasion, like Australia and parts of Africa, India, and other parts of Southeast Asia that have not been described yet in books that they've produced. Um, Whereas the demons are a little bit more landlocked by their strategy. There are also a couple of wild cards. There's the Tolkien Adventures. These are another one of those fake mercenary groups, kind of similar to Hellord Rune and the Magic Zone, except this one is Devils, and it's actually controlled by an enterprising imp that has just asserted himself as an overlord. And because of the way he's maintaining his tactics and absorbing leftovers from other broken up Devil squads and also humans and people from the Tolkien war that are still bitter against the CS, and also disguising themselves as a mercenary bandit type group so that they can operate a little bit in the open without people realizing what they are. He's actually positioned to be one of the top Devil lords on the planet within a couple of years, potentially. Another wild card is Hellord Siren. She's doesn't really have much of an army to speak of, and is kind of more developing a spy network out of northern Mexico and the Pecos Empire. And how much she's able to take over the Pecos Empire is a good chunk of how much she develops as a potential threat down the line. But she's a slow burn. Basically, in conclusion to all of this, because I got to wrap up at some point because I'm at 37 minutes almost. The Minion War dramatically affects the setting dynamic, but it is not as end of the world as it is portrayed. As described, the powers that be on Earth will be able to push back and contain the Minion armies to remote locations, preventing either side from ever reaching that 50% leyline nexus goal. In many ways, the greater danger to the planet comes from the Eurozone. It's more so than North America, because it is not as well set up to defend itself. North America might have been the origin source of the cataclysm, at least insofar as Yellowstone blowing up. But Europe was much more heavily ravaged and has had large-scale ongoing conflicts. I mean, there's less demon and devil forces described in the book for Europe, because in many ways there's already a bunch of established demonic groups there in terms of the gargoyles and the neighboring Phoenix Empire. But that's going to have to be the subject for another video. For now, all I can say is whether you want to use the Savage Worlds rule system or you want to support the original Palladium books by going to palladiumbooks.com and buying their products there. I can't recommend Rifts enough, especially how the Minion War kind of helps reset the whole thing and makes it approachable for new players and stuff. So leave me some comments on maybe some other things you might like me to talk about for further Rifts videos, and have a good one.